Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, along with co-host this week, Ivan Ozerets.
Hello.
He is the brains behind the GreatBase Podcast. We've been asked to take it a little bit further, and we're going to do that with the discussion of the last podcast. 192 was USTA player development in America. Javier Palenque. I'm sure he's going to give it a better go than me. I've known him for like 10 years. He was a guest on our podcast previously. Great story. Immigrant from Bolivia. And when he was given citizenship, I'll ask him to tell that story about what the judge told him. And it's his mission to try to improve tennis in America. And he's up to 500 articles with, obviously, like ourselves, he would have critics. Love, hate. Hate's a strong word. Actually, the GreatBase, in one sense, we're small. We're a drop in the ocean. Those of you listening the first time, the GreatBase is a pathway, a curriculum. It's a system of systems. It's just homework. We've studied all these different tennis teachers. But why a GreatBase is getting smaller is, say it strongly, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, it's almost like there's a new website every day. The internet just is like ba-boom, ba-boom. Just as the late Braden said, so much bad information is going out so fast. But passion. Let me call up a highly educated individual who is dedicated to trying to improve tennis. And the insiders certainly know tennis needs a shot in the arm. The invasion of pickleball, the confusion of I like how he calls the Grand Slams carnivals. They are like huge parties.
Yeah.
Let me give him a shout here. Dialing for tennis information.
Hello.
Javier, good afternoon.
Hi, Javier.
Hello. Hi, Steve. Hi, Ivan. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. I was just telling our listeners a little about your story. You've been on the podcast before, your passion. Mentioned immigrant from Bolivia, highly educated. I know it's on previous podcasts, but also in our show notes or the write-up for our podcast, we'll put down the 1 hour segment that you sent to Yvonne and myself. It's on YouTube. But why don't you tell us about what your mission is and the judge and becoming an American citizen? I think that's a great place to start.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm originally from Bolivia, and Bolivia is a poor country. However, it's a beautiful country. And for those who don't know, poor countries aren't poor because they have no resources. They're poor because they're poorly managed. And this is very important to understand. I happen to come from an established family of highly educated people. So I had a good life in a very poor country, but a life that compares or is even better than most people here in America. And I didn't like the social differences that exist between people who have money and who don't. As an example, when we played at the country club, we had ball boys. Imagine it's a Saturday and we have ball boys to pass us the ball so we don't walk as much in the tennis court. Imagine that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's insane. But here's what's really funny about it. The ball boys and the groundskeepers who never had a lesson in their life usually would beat me or whoever was like us because they just overheard everything, but with attention, and they were pretty good actually. And so when you come from a third world country like I do, and you come and study in a first class institution like I did here in America for my master's and my undergrad and executive education, then you get the benefit of both worlds. And what happened was that, of course, when I was to become a citizen, I was so delighted to become a citizen and be part of this grandiose country called the United States. You realize around the country, everybody admires the United States. The problem is that most Americans don't really understand how important the United States is in the world. And this is important to understand because it gives you a perspective that's different, as if you don't understand how big the United States is and how admired it is. So to me, one of the most proudest moments was when I was able to be part of what I thought was the world's greatest country, the greatest democracy, the greatest system, et cetera, et cetera. I became a citizen in Faneuil Hall. For those who know, there's Faneuil Hall is a small hall in Boston, where in fact the Patriots concocted against the English. And it's a place of Americana, really, where everybody gathered to make sure they kick the British out. And I had the fortune to get my citizenship document right there. Went at the ceremony. It's a very small hall for those who know. There's approximately, 200 people at that. I was at the front. And the judge saw me and summoned me and said to me, "You, sir, what is your name?" And I said, "My name is Javier Palenque." And then she said, "Where do you come from?" I said, "I come from Bolivia." And she was speaking to me personally, but she was giving a message to everybody. She just personalized the message to me because I was in front of her. Of course, I was, elevated and in heaven, really being summoned the way I was and getting what I wanted forever, which was to have an American citizenship and gain the respect all over the world just by carrying that passport. So I thought. And so she said to me, "Remember today. Today is a very important day. So I want you to make sure you forget everything that's bad about your country and bring everything to this country from this moment on, everything that's good about your country to make this country better. Can you do that?" I said, "Of course I can." And then she said, "Also, if you see us failing throughout your life, remember this moment, Javier." She said, and I said, "What do you want me to do?" "You have to steer us right. So this is when you find us failing, remember today, we need the spirit of making sure the new blood that comes into the country steers us in the right direction, because at the end of the day, we're human and we will steer away from what our founding fathers wanted." And of course, I made that promise to do so. So throughout my career, I always kept thinking, what can I do could benefit a lot of people? What could I do that would benefit a lot of people? It's very hard to find something that would benefit a lot of people until I started being part of the tennis world in the United States with my kids. And I decided to start finding several flaws all over the system. And I wrote a very nice note in the most respectful of ways to the then Katrina Adams and said, "I think there's a lot of things that I can help you improve. I would like to have a board meeting in which I would tell you what I think you're doing wrong and what you could do right." And the reason I believe my thoughts are valid are because, first, I play tennis. Second, I'm part of the system. Three, I come from overseas. And fourth, I know how to do this in a better way. I would like you to hear me out. They never responded. After an enormous amount of pressure from people I know and people I've met, 6 months later, Katrina Adams replied and basically said, "We don't need anybody's help. Tennis is growing. We are doing great. Get lost." That's basically her message. That made me so mad because, of course, you all know that tennis is a game of managing time. You take time away and you give less time away. You got to understand that as a basic principle for tennis. And she was actually not even understanding that because it took her 6 months to reply to me. And then she basically said, "We're doing everything great," when it's obvious that they were not. I got so mad, I then decided, you know what? I'm going to start writing and make this right. You think you can defy me like that? You can't. And so then I thought I could help and do my community service to the country that I love by trying to move a mountain, literally, because I foolishly believe that you can move a mountain, because we wouldn't be in America if our founders didn't believe they could actually beat the English. And that's part of the American spirit that I wish to give back to the country. I've done quite well by the country. My kids are U.S. citizens. Obviously, I am a U.S. citizen. And so this is why I take this to heart, because to answer the judge's question, if you see us failing, remember, we need your help. And this is why I try to fight the USTA, not because I want to fight the USTA, because they are wrong. And they are destroying what is, I consider, the most beautiful sport that exists, because tennis is considered physical chess. And you are out there on your own, and it basically resembles life, in my opinion. Much more so in this day and age in which our kids are going to have multiple jobs by the time they're 30. And therefore, they need to learn tennis as a basis for them being able to succeed in life. So I think tennis is poorly marketed, because it is actually an enormous and fabulous way for gaining leadership skills and understanding that there's always somebody better than you. And if you can't win with your average game, you're not good, which is life. So that's the little story I got.
Javier, thanks so much.
Thank you. Well,
with our listeners, I've known you, I would think, a little over 10 years, and
That's right.
Many different experiences together. I've always said you need to be on 60 Minutes. Your story, tell us about the readership. I mean, how many people are reading? How many people are hearing your voice, know about your work? I mean, is it a story of controversy, a story of corruption, a story of apathy? But tell us a little bit about the readership. I mentioned to you on the phone, wouldn't it be great if Andy Roddick had you on his podcast, because his podcast is on TV. He's going to have such a large voice. I think he does a very good job. Just out of the gate, I think a lot of people are saying the same thing. I know a lot of people are. I say I've been going to the Joe Rogan of tennis podcasts. But tell us about your readership and how how many people are you reaching, and is making a difference? Are you getting feedback?
Well, I write. I used to write once a week, and when the U.S. Open plays, I try to write once a day, because that's when most people are focused on tennis. On any given moment, 2,000 to 3,000 people read the articles. I can tell you that every CEO of every major federation reads it. A lot of tennis players, pros, a lot of USTA people inside who pretend not to read it, but they read it. Obviously, their attorneys read it all the time, because they're looking for me to say something that is false, to, I'm sure, try to silence me. On average, I think I would get 2,000 to 3,000 people, depending on the article, or if a major publication pushes it, that can go up to 8,000. Once John Wertheim posted, I got 10,000 out of his post. So there's a lot of followers, and I get a lot of letters of people telling me to please not stop writing, that I should continue. And obviously the federations, meaning the USTA, they try to not read what I write. However, they actually do many of the things that I suggest they do. And they do it, pretending it's their initiative, as opposed to me cornering them in a way that they have no choice but to do that.
With Michael Dowse, I remember I was based in Orlando at that time, had a small tennis facility that we built. But you have had the chance to meet with the former CEO. Tell us about that.
I did. When Michael Dowse came into being elected the CEO of the USTA, I wrote him a letter. I told him that I didn't have luck before, that I wanted to meet with him, and that I have many pointers for the solution for tennis. And he invited me to go in. I went in. I requested I only speak to him. I didn't want to speak to anybody else, because if everybody else would, I think would not contribute to the dynamic that I wanted to create. And I explained to him what the problems are, what the limitations of the USTA are, and how the culture is a problem and the funding is a problem, and how they are ignoring basically what they should not be ignoring. And he agreed with me. He agreed with me in almost everything I said. And I think he tried to implement some of those ideas, which also included cost cutting, because by then, because of COVID, they bought out people, so they leave, I think, 20%. Now they're back up with another more hires. The payroll should be actually half of what it currently is. He was a welcoming individual and tried to do good, tried to follow good initiatives. Unfortunately, in the end, he probably decided this is not going to work if I don't do what is needed, and he quit.
Tell us the story of the 2 mugs that you gave him.
Oh, as a way of pushing him and making sure that my visit was memorable, I gave him 2 mugs. One mug I had imprinted in there a caricature of a gardener, a chubby gardener with all bunch of shrubbery and greenery all over, and the gardener was named Mike, but I put it there as a name Miguel. That there was a double intention there because the Hispanic population is the youngest population in this country, as well as the fastest growing, and the one that's going to be a majority eventually, if you were to consider that by race. I then gave him a second mug, which was morbid, and it had also a caricature of the same character, but he was a mortician with a funeral director home. And it was, of course, black and dark. And my intention was, of course, he had 2 choices, right? He could have gotten the gift, the well-intentioned gift, and he would have said, I'll throw these out. But they were cute, and I figured that he was going to take them home. And if he was going to take them home, he probably, if he had a choice any morning, he would never choose the one that had the mortician or the funeral director, but rather he would choose the one that was the gardener. And then whoever else was to take that other mug of the funeral director or mortician, then they would have had an early conversation about the mortician and being a gardener. And I was hoping that then whenever every morning that he's at home and drinking his coffee, he would remember that tennis has to serve people and people do not have to be served by it. That was my story regarding the mugs.
Oh, that's great. Wow. With the USTA board, not spelled BORED, but the leadership, and Michael Dowse was not in place that long, correct? He resigned.
Yeah, he resigned after, I believe it was 2 years.
And then with the board, this conversation on the USTA started with Jose Aguirre's letter that we brought out from years ago, Wayne Bryan's letter. And I know that you've made a complete study of the organization, and I do think that fingers need to point everywhere. And I think I said last week is that we need to first look in the mirror and point the finger at ourselves. Like, what are we all doing individually to improve tennis? But with Jose's letter, he complained about some members of the board that are not supporting player development. How does that work? I mean, we know that the incoming president, like a Katrina Adams, was only a 2-year term, but Andy Andrews, his daughter fell victim to cancer and unfortunately passed away. So he stepped down. So she was in position 4 years. But tell us a little bit about how that works with the 2-year cycle of the president, and then how does one get on the board, and how many people are on the board, and how does that all work?
Okay, so this is really important to understand, because at the core, the backbone of the problem that the USTA has is its governance. And its governance means how it is actually set up. And unfortunately, the chairman and the board are rotating positions chosen by the different sections every 2 years. So in any organization, one thing you don't want to change is the leadership, because you may like Steve A and I like B. and Ivan may like C. So if in 6 years we switch, well, you want to pursue A, I want to pursue B, Ivan wants to pursue C. And then because of those absurd dynamics, then you get whoever comes in this case, Katrina Adams, for example, she had an agenda. Then comes somebody else. Now, it's important to understand the chairman is actually the position that is elected every 2 years along with the board, but the CEO is actually the position that runs things based on what the board wants. And so if you have a lack of vision that is unified, for example, making it a matter of the state, if you were to talk countries, like it's a state mandate, for example, to pursue and grow the sport. If different people have different visions, they pursue their own individual, whatever it is that they pursue, and they actually hurt the game. And that's why one of the solutions is to change that governance structure, because you cannot, you have a doctor today. So now the greatest accomplishment of this current chairman is, well, tennis is a healthy sport. We all know that. He doesn't need to tell us that. The next one is going to be, I believe, Brian Vahaley, who is who used to be a tennis player. He's younger. He may bring in some changes, but they're going to be different than what the current chairman did, and it's only going to be for 2 years unless he's reelected. And so this is the crux of the problem. So no organization can grow if it doesn't have a long-term vision. Because there is no long-term vision that is pursued, then they all default to growing the USA.
And we talked about last week with Chris Everett's facility. It was at one point the Seguzo Bassett facility, and Dave Anderson and I were based there. I was the first tennis director they hired, but the president at that time felt that there should be a McEnroe, a Connors, a Billie Jean King. He wanted to have more than just one facility. So then another, you would know, because blood, sweat, and tears. You put so much time and effort into this. Then, like, how did Lake Nona happen? I mean, how would that be voted upon? We're going to have 100 tennis courts on one zip code. I mean, how would that decision have unfolded?
Well, they had at the moment the people from Tavistock, which are the landowners of that Orlando facility, are trying to build a hub within Orlando, a medical hub or a technological hub. And they decided to, invite the people. So I think there's people from Tavistock who knew people of the board or people that are involved in the USTA, and then they sold them on the idea of creating this massive facility in one zip code. Now it sounds very good. 100 courts sounds fantastic for a tournament, I suppose. But the reality is, this is something that I said at the beginning of this interview, which is we have 42,000 zip codes. You cannot have one facility with 100 courts in one location. Well, that means you have 41,999 that have nothing, and you can't do that. So this is a lack of understanding of the size of the country, the depth of the country, and the way the country is made up. And that's why Lake Nona has been built. It serves a purpose. I'm not going to say it does not. But the country needs multiple sites, not one.
With as far as voting, is it democracy rules? Is it how many the number of people on the board?
Well, each section has a number of votes, and each section has those votes depending on who's on the section, how many clubs are involved. And democracy is a kind word, but there's a lot of dealing here and there, open and closed deals to push an issue through. And that's why there's interest, obviously, and then, there's maneuvers. And there's also the problem is the governance, right? Nobody in any business, if you were to make that decision, the board represents a whole bunch of owners or shareholders. So they make the decision based on the shareholders. In the case of tennis, we are all shareholders, but we don't get to vote. We don't get to listen to the meeting. We don't get to see the minutes. So they decide on their own what they want to do. And this is how they create a little club, because you can get anything through by talking and being members of the club. So if you're a member of a club but that is by default created by the poor governance, then you're not going to say what you want to say, because then you're going to alter the club dynamic. But this dynamic is actually what is leading to the problem of tennis, because tennis should be governed independently and the shareholders should have some representation. Now, the shareholders in this case would be the clubs, the parents, the kids, the cities, the coaches. But all of those pieces have no representation. So they'll decide whatever is convenient for them, and whoever is smarter or can manipulate people better then decides to do what they want to do. And you end up with a monster like Lake Nona, who can't even pay its maintenance fees because they didn't figure that out correctly. And it's so poorly built that they don't even have a stadium in there. And the bathroom distribution is poor. And they don't even have walls for kids to practice. I mean, it is very poorly designed. And I'm sure that if you ask for an audit of the whole thing, you'd be surprised how many funny business things you would find.
Yeah, they do have a backboard now. It's a small one. But when it was built, they didn't have a classroom. Although USPTA, which is right there on the same location, they have a nice classroom. When I say they don't have a classroom, they don't have a very. It wasn't really well thought out. They have a very small classroom. With one thing about player development, but I want to come back to the sections and more, the whole the organization overall. With so many things we can talk about. To me, tennis is tennis. So the one thing about Lake Nona, which was baffling to me, I think that you got to thrive on criticism. We're always telling players, be very polite when someone gives you a compliment, but how to get better is just to thrive on criticism, be your own best critic. It'd be nice if there was a running trail around. It would have been nice if there was a track. I mean, they do have some running lanes. But I think one thing that was amazing is that the player development was separate. When people go to pro tournaments, they want to watch the pros practice. You would think Joe Public would be able to go to Lake Nona and watch the pros practice. But my next question would be coming back to just the overall organization, the 17 different sections. I know you made a study of that, a study of those organizations. They vary greatly, correct?
They vary greatly. Some of them are well-funded. Some of them are poorly funded. Some of them do a fabulous job giving so little resources that they have. Others do a pathetic job. And here's what you need to know about sections. And it's really important to understand this. And in my articles, I detail it with links to everything, because everything I say is linked so you could see it. You don't have to believe me. I just do it for you so you could understand and see the whole dynamic. The USTA roughly has in budget $60 million for the 17 sections. Out of this money, they give to the different 17 sections based on how much population they cover and how big a city or area they have to serve. So let's say one area like the New York area, USTA Eastern, which is in my article, they get, if I'm not mistaken, $5 million from the USTA as a grant. And you would think those $5 million would be widely used to have a little bit of administrative function, and most of that money should go for coaches so they can teach either for free or they could have their own salary and the rates are subsidized so more people can play. Especially if you want more people to be able to learn the game, being tennis a game that you need to invest time and money to learn, but you get to a point where you decide you don't want to learn it, so it takes time and resources to do that. Well, out of the $5 million that they get, they only give that as grants 8%. So imagine 10% would be $500,000, 8% is like $400,000. Now, $400,000, if you then further study that, who gets that? It's mostly people that they know. It also doesn't mean it ends up in the kid's hands. So when the USTA gives this $5 million to the Eastern section, for example, most of that money is spent in payroll, administrative, overhead, and stuff that does nothing for tennis. So the U.S. Open can give them 10 million. Who cares? Because at the end of the day, they get such a small portion of that the money never reaches the kids. So the money is consumed by people who don't do anything for tennis in the process. So it doesn't matter that the U.S. Open does well. It doesn't matter that it's full. It doesn't matter that they make $1 billion if the money doesn't end up in who needs it. And who needs it are the kids, the coaches, the parents, the cities, the clubs. And this is what people don't understand.
Here's an interesting point for our listeners. So a small group of us went to Tennis Memphis, a nonprofit. And the city has 60 tennis courts, and they have 4 indoor centers. Now, I mean, it's changed where they have one magnificent multi-million-dollar facility because the story circumstance, they lost their tournament. The tournament facility turned into, I believe, townhouses, and then the university and the city, people came together. So now it's changed. But when we were there, they had 4, modest indoor facilities. 2 had 4 courts, 2 had 2 courts, but not many cities have, indoor tennis courts. So my point is I called you up and I said, hey, do me a favor, tell me how this operation works. And then when the matter days, you call me back up, and obviously you have the business savvy, the business education, but the wherewithal to investigate. And so you told me, because it really is public domain, what was going on with a nonprofit.
Right.
But you've already done it. You've done the same thing with the other, like say Tennis Australia, LTA, French.
Yep.
With so there's certainly, which is so important, is there's fact behind what you put out. You do your homework.
Absolutely, I can't put anything that is not true, and because I, of course, I am like Don Quixote, right, fighting the windmills, and I have to put what is valid and true, and that's why I put links in. Anybody that doubts me, all you got to do is follow the link. You may disagree with me, and that's perfectly okay, but go through the links and you will come to the same conclusion.
This may sound so boastful, but I've been teaching tennis 50 years. So when I talk to a club owner, an operator, tennis director, I really don't even have to be there to tell them what's going on with their operation. That comes down to, we'll circle back and talk about education. What are the standards? What do, what is typical? And it's very typical to say, well, and this is what happened with Tennis Memphis, is there was people on salary. There were some people who really worked very, very hard and put in long hours, and the passion, the mission, a lot of things were positive in theory, but there was just a lot of people that were not producing. You have producers and parasites.
Right.
Are they living off the game? Are they producing? And is it the problems with the USTA and the distribution of dollars? Is that pretty much the same straight across the board with the four carnivals, the 4 Super Bowls, the 4 fortnights we have of great tennis?
The best, I'll tell you, of the 4 Grand Slams, the best run is the one that has the most involvement, which is Wimbledon, because they are members. So there's a lot of accountability by default. Then they would act like the shareholders, just with different opinions. Tennis Australia is run pretty much like the USTA with an iron fist. And the French run a very good system, I think they all are individually better than the USTA, yet we have the most people, the most money, and the most revenue. But the problem with the USTA for the listeners and for you, Steve and Ivan, to comprehend is any business has a life cycle, and the life cycle is like a bell curve. And so you need a certain kind of leadership depending on where you are on the cycle. So if you're at the beginning of the bell curve, well, you need a barbarian, and a barbarian is somebody who's going to look for a way to do something, and that would be Jack Kramer, right? They started the tour, they fought, and they did everything that they could. That's the kind of leadership you needed. As things progress, you end up with the bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats are located at the down slope of that bell curve, and this is where you get the bureaucrats stop everything, kill innovation, only work to preserve their jobs, and absolutely stall innovation. And this is where we are. So if tennis were to choose the right leadership for the moment that it's at, it certainly wouldn't choose the current chairman, the current CEO, or the current executives because they're bureaucrats. They're exactly the wrong people for the wrong stage at the wrong time for where the sport is.
Well, that term "fat cat," the house cat and the street cat. The fat cat doesn't have to work too hard.
And in fact, they work to not work. They work so there's no dissent. How is it possible that the USTA, for example, doesn't have a yearly summit in which everybody voices their opinions and they listen to them and implement them? At the next year, they report on them. They do everything behind closed doors. It is a boys' club, so they don't want anything changed. And the reason they don't want anything changed, because if you were to change something, anybody with a little business sense changes the leadership. It's the wrong leadership at the wrong time.
Well, that iron fist,
they would all lose their job.
You used the comment iron fist. I mean, iron curtain. I think of tennis on, where I'm standing and being on the tennis court between the lines, dealing with parents, players, coaches. Certainly there's education and there's service and I respect the people that are providing a service. Say, for example, a tennis coach, he or she's conducting a workout. And I mean, they're under the hot sun and the ball baskets and feeding balls, but it isn't necessarily an education. We'll talk about the standards. But I think a third word with the four majors and the USTA, I think that obviously that's where the money comes from, the US Open, is education, service, and entertainment. Tell us a little bit more about, let's say, and obviously we have a history with Craig Tiley, and he's looked upon so favorably as a tournament director. Just like you said, it is a great show, the US Open, a great show. It's but there's so much confusion that the happy slam, that I would say overall, though, that even though we're happy 2 weeks sitting at home watching such great tennis of all four majors, but tennis is not really happy overall. I mean, as far as does Joe Public really know some of the, like growth? I mean, I know you've talked quite a bit about growth, or how many people really are playing, and is our sport in decline, and how accurate was that Sports Illustrated cover years ago? Is tennis dying? But why don't you touch upon entertainment and confusion, like what happens at the four majors, and then what's happening with the game overall?
Okay, so let's go over quickly going over the slams. Like Wimbledon is, of course, the only event that has a grass surface, and it's in England, and therefore a lot of the different people from all over Europe go and service it, and it's a unique event, and it runs pretty well. During COVID, they actually made money because they bought insurance.
Right.
Contrast that with the USTA, that they figured, we're not going to buy insurance, and they lost $180 million. And you also have to understand Craig Tiley's work, which I will tell you, as a setup for an entertainment venue, it is unquestionable that he does a wonderful job.
It's a festival.
But the reality is, Yes, it is a festival, so people go and have fun. Remember, it's an island, so you got to go to the island. It's very far away for everybody. It's a long trip, so he makes it a point to be good. And uh, Australia has, if I'm not mistaken, I think 23 million people, something like that. It's roughly the size of the U.S., maybe a little smaller. The U.S. has 13 times more population and actually brings in less people to see the event. And the only reason the U.S. Open is full is because it's in New York City, and New York City is the financial district of the universe. So if that was somewhere else, it wouldn't work the same. So this is important to understand. So Craig Tiley has a wonderful event. It is really a festival, so people go out, have a good time. That doesn't mean they play tennis. And that's okay. I think that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to receive, as in the USTA case as of 2022, $550 million dollars of revenue, that better end up helping tennis all over the country in the 42,000 zip codes that we have. And that doesn't end up being a lot of money. And if you remember what I just said a few moments ago, it doesn't matter if it gets $1 billion in revenue if in the end the money doesn't end up in the kids' parks and coaches' hands. It doesn't. So the entertainment part of it works. But if you compare the U.S. Open to the other venues, the U.S. Open doesn't do a better job than the Australian Open, even though it has 13 times more people. It's priced expensive. It's really unaffordable to go be able to see it. And here's the kicker. The demographics have shifted. No longer, like right now, nobody watches the 6 o'clock news. There is no Walter Cronkite. That 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 belief is gone, which is why people don't no longer want to be entertained by the sport. Which means if you have no people playing the game, it is very difficult for them to want to watch the game. And the USTA knows this. And because of that, they made it an entertainment venue for Wall Streeters. So they buy all the box seats. They don't even show up. And the people that show up don't even play. It's where you take your customers, and it's a nice event. It lasts 2 weeks. It's worth it. It's expensive. It doesn't matter. Nobody pays for it. The company does, right? You expense it all out. So all that money is not really good money. When I say good money, I don't mean it's bad money. Good money is money from families, parents who want to see the event, and that money reproduces more tennis playing people. But bankers' money it's good money in the sense that it brings you the numbers, but those people are not going to play. Those people are not going to go buy lessons. Those people are not going to go buy tennis balls or tennis equipment. They just use the event to entertain some client, and that's it. And so this is a problem. And so the problem then becomes further complicated by the following. The USDA claims we have 24 million players. If you look at their financials, we've had decreased membership revenues from 21 million to 14 million as of 2022. And that means it's going down. So if you have the 24 million players, if you just divide that by how many people actually register to the USTA, that's only 350,000 people. So where are the remaining 23,650,000? They don't exist. But the USTA will claim they exist because they're trying to get their contract with ESPN, which expires in 2 years, and they're working hard. And they're trying to say that so many people now play. And because of COVID, people play. Here's another thing that people need to think about. If tennis increased as much as they claim because of COVID, that tells you, why are they paying all these people at the USTA and they were unable to unlock that demand that they claim COVID brought? If the demand was there and the pandemic made people go play, well, that means you're paying all these people for what if there was such a demand? There isn't such a demand. Those numbers don't exist. 24 million players at $1 a piece. would be $24 million more. The revenue of the USTA for membership is only 14 million. The average rate to become a USTA member is 42. That gives you 340,000 players. 340,000 divided by 24 million is, I think, 3%. That means nobody wants to deal with the USTA. And if nobody wants to deal with the USTA, why do they control the game? Because they don't want to pay taxes. Because they don't want to pay federal taxes. They want to keep the nonprofit status. And that's why they have, as a CEO, a person who has never played tennis. How can you grow the sport if you have as a CEO a person who has never played tennis? This is
I've always found it baffling where the number of people play is measured on how many tennis balls are sold. And I don't know any numbers on that, but it's like Harry Hopman, the late Harry Hopman said years ago, and one of the reasons that Tennis Australia went down is affluency. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and I tell people, if you look at the draw sheets, the players that are from countries that are not doing as well economically, hungry dog hunts best. You touch upon with the family versus a federation. You mentioned, like say Jose Higueras. He started as a ball boy, Arantes and Santana, and with just a story that when you tennis being a blue collar, how do you say it, a blue collar sport? The people who never paid for a tennis lesson. Could you just expound on that? Is that I think we could come back to monies. I do think that you have so much information. You've done so much homework. I do think we don't want to sound like sour grapes. Is that I think when people talk about USTA, player development, but all different sections, a lot of times people just get stuck on, what the very top executives make at the national level, not necessarily at the sectional level. But we could come back to that. But why don't you talk a little bit about what you're sharing with me over the last couple of days, the blue collar sport,
sure.
Never paid for a tennis lesson, like say Ferrer, Osaka, Fritz, Tiafoe, Everett. Go ahead.
Well, let me give you a few insights. And a lot of this I know because people contact me and tell me, or the research that I do, because I really love tennis. And I think that America needs tennis, and parents need tennis, and kids need tennis. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to be able to match that. But here's the biggest misconception that tennis has. Tennis is a blue-collar sport played by white-collar people. And when I say that, it means that a blue-collar sport means you have to do the same task over and over and over and over to master it. A blue-collar person doesn't necessarily have to do that. I'll give you a story about David Ferrer. David Ferrer and his coach was complaining that he didn't put enough effort in his practices, and he didn't really want to practice to become a professional. By the way, David Ferrer, pound for pound, inch by inch, is the most accomplished tennis player there is, given his size and weight limitation and how far he actually advanced. He could beat and be at the top echelon when he didn't have the physical capability to be able to do so. So one time he actually had a dispute with his coach, and he decided to quit tennis. Since he quit tennis, he looked for a job, and he worked as a bricklayer. And then he realized that being a bricklayer was horrible, and he decided to understand that he could probably do the same thing, meaning doing a blue-collar work, to get to the level that he had accomplished. And if you understand that dynamic, in this case of Jose Higueras was also a ball boy. So was Orantes, so was Manolo Santana. I mean, these are people that are seen and paying on the court because this is where they either make a living or this is what they can accomplish, which means they're poor. The same goes for Tiafoe, right? If you now take the top two American players, Tiafoe and Fritz, both paid zero for lessons. Tiafoe living in a facility in Maryland, and Fritz's dad is a coach. If you look at the women's side, you have the exact opposite. Navarro and Pegula both are daughters of billionaires. So just by looking at that dynamic, even if you don't believe anything I say or agree, what's missing between those who pay anything and those who pay nothing? What's missing is the people in the middle. So today I can tell you in no uncertain terms, the USTA has never had better revenues as of today. Yet, it has never been so far away from the middle class ever, which means the jobs for coaches are at stake, which means parents don't know about tennis, which means there's no fans to watch the US Open or the Stars because there's a disconnect. You cannot run a sport if you don't know how the game is played and look at the top two females and top two males and you either have all the money in the world to learn or you have no money in the world to learn. You're missing the middle. There's the problem. There's the solution.
What about Osaka? Tell us a story about her backs
In the
against
case
the wall.
of Naomi Osaka, in the case of Naomi Osaka and those who have Netflix, they could watch Netflix. You will see that at one point she says in the documentary, she says, if I don't win, my parents will go bankrupt. I'll tell you another story about Novak Djokovic. Novak Djokovic was training in Germany, and he came back home once to be with his family, and he found the loan sharks that were lending money to his dad. He found one of the loan sharks with a knife against the throat of his father, asking for the money to be paid back. Imagine if you are Novak Djokovic and you look at your dad, who's giving you the money so you can train in Germany, and you see a guy with a knife on the throat of your father because he can't make those, loan shark payments. You have one choice, which is to win. There is no other choice. And you don't win for you. You win for your family, for your country. It's something bigger than you. And that's very hard to do if the game is the way the USTA has set it up. It's only for the people who can afford it. This makes no sense. The odds of you getting a champion don't exist. They just don't exist if those are the dynamics. I'll give you another story. Ronaldo, in an interview, the famous soccer player, who is hard work and talent, but more hard work than talent. Leo Messi is absolute gift of talent. He worked as hard, but not as hard as Ronaldo. One day he came home and his mom couldn't afford to pay the electric bill. So they had no electricity. So he said, I'm going to be the best soccer player on earth. We're never going to go through this horrible, horrible scenario again. And you need that hunger. And that comes with blue collar work ethic. That comes with blue collar grit. That comes with blue collar incentives to succeed in life. And yet the system that USTA has set up here is, well, if you travel, you get points. And if you play UTR, you don't play the backgrounds because somebody may beat you. And you're trying to buy your way up. And then there's one skill you need when you're up, which is how do you fight with your average game? You can't if you don't have those life situations happen to you when you're a kid. And that explains why America doesn't have the champions that it needs while having them. Those kinds of people with those kinds of needs are in every corner and in every one of those 42,000 zip codes. It's the failure of the leadership to be able to give them a system so they come and we learn about those kids.
I've said this before on our podcast. One of my older brothers wrote 10 books on ice hockey, but in the younger brother, I gave him a hard time that he didn't dedicate the first book to anyone. but I think it was the second book dedicated to my grandfather who bought me my first pair of hockey gloves. But the third book, I believe it was, regardless of the number, what number book it was, my father understood the true sport, the true meaning of sport, participation. And you talk about that all the time. But tennis, I tell kids, it's a worldwide sport, and they're really hung up on their USTA status or what they're ranked in the country. And but tennis is now in the U.S. It's a minor sport. It's a private sport. It needs to become a major sport. Certainly, okay, maybe it'll never be football, basketball, but it needs to become bigger and it needs to become public. Going back to the USTA dollars, all those empty courts at Lake Nona, and they're charging fees. Be open to the public. But if you're so top heavy with what you're paying your executives, it's amazing to have a public park charge such large fees. Now, years ago, and it still exists in the part of the world you live in South Florida, I first went to Boca Raton in '74, and I was just recently in Florida, spent so much time there. The Boynton Beach Tennis Center, the Delray Beach Tennis Center. You can start right down Flamingo Park and go up to North Miami Beach and David Park, and now it's called Jimmy Everett. It was Holiday Park. The family could pay like $400 for the year. And of course, years ago, it was less than that. That's the price now. That you could charge $400 for the year, and the family has unlimited play on clay courts. And why don't you just comment on that participation, the solution, how to have more people play the game?
Well, the thing is, I believe that tennis is never going to be a massive sport, but I believe it should be the sport of the 1%. That doesn't mean the 1% of income earners. It means the 1% of the population, regardless of your income. And that way, you have ambassadors of the sport in every zip code, like Billie Jean King was when she played, like Althea Gibson was, like Arthur Ashe was. And this is how you actually grow the game, by having it reach all the zip codes in the country. And the truth is that participation matters, because the only way you're going to have fans that are going to go out and buy lessons, use the courts, watch TV, care about who plays the U.S. Open, is if they are connected to the game. And you cannot make it so expensive and the barrier of entry to be so high to be exposed to the game that not enough people are exposed. My kid is in high school, and if you go to any high school meeting and you talk about tennis to any random parent, they will know nothing about it. And this is the disconnect that I bring back, why the middle class is so disconnected and divorced that it is impossible to get participation. And those who do participate then find a system that is like so Davis Cupish, like so expensive, so competitive, so difficult that it turns kids off. Kids today, unfortunately, are not like kids were many years ago. So that demographic and psychographic has changed. And so the game has to adapt to that if it wants to capture the same amount of kids that played before. No, now that is no longer the case. So society has changed. The psychographics has changed. The way people buy, consume the sport has changed, and the USTA has not. This is why I go back to the explanation. At this stage of the game, we are at the bottom part of the bell curve. You need leadership that is transformative, that is innovative, that is going to challenge the status quo so it doesn't end up disappearing. But the USTA, given its poor governance structure, has chosen bureaucrats and people who don't know how to play, who only focus on the U.S. Open and think that because the U.S. Open does well, tennis is doing well. the opposite is true.
Julian Krinsky, great friend. I mean, he's done so much for so many people that we've trained to teach tennis. He ran a very large business. At one point, it had to be, if not very close to the largest tennis camp in the U.S. Highly educated. And then, his wife Tina as well, her background. But this is something that the pros should understand loud and clear. Is that I've heard Julian say 95% of the pros chase 5% of the business. And that 5% of the business is the kids that are taking sometimes even a private lesson every day, where it should be flipped. And then we could get into we could get into the tennis teaching side of it. Is that it used to be that you just, we were developing players, we weren't recruiting players. We didn't have people going out to tournaments and handing out business cards. So I spoke to Matt Clore just today about many other things, but one was there's just so many different areas that need to improve. So to embrace the beginner, to embrace getting new people in the game, but then what type of start do they get? And that's where I understand that recreational tennis has to be packaged differently, but a forehand's a forehand. And we need to do a much better job with education as far as when people first enter the game. They need to have great instruction. I mean, but it could be simplified. It doesn't have to be where you have to join a club and pay all sorts of money. But we need to educate.
Right.
We can educate the parent, just like years ago in Little League baseball. All Americans had a pretty good idea. That the shortstop has to get their body in front of the ball, and these are all these things that. And I know tennis is very technical. The Swedes back in the 80s, they called the hobby coaches animators, but just to have a volunteer force. I think the USTA certainly have to thank all the volunteers that make the festival, the U.S. Open, the success it is. But we have to, at the grassroots level, I know that we talked to you about player development, we can touch upon that, but with just going back to the distribution of dollars, how to get rackets in kids' hands. You hear that all the time. Like when we went to Tennis Memphis, I said, well, yeah, it's great to get a racket in a kid's hand, but if you're only going to see that kid, on one Saturday morning, once, twice a year, or maybe just a couple times in the summer, that's not going to really get them connected to the sport. But why don't you talk about distribution of dollars to the grassroots, and then how the governing body of tennis and the different sections could improve participation, increase participation?
Well, I think that when one looks at a problem as a consultant, like my case, you got to look at it from above and see, okay, what is the real crux of the problem? And the crux of the problem is that we need like a sales funnel, right? You ought to make a lot of calls. So then after making a lot of calls, then you may get some good leads. And then out of those some good leads, you may get actually a sale or two. And then that's how you create your business. So you have a big funnel. Tennis is no different. Tennis needs an enormous amount of people who play, and I mean kids and young adults, because that's the age group that they're going to start. And it's really important to not ignore the young adults, because they'll be parents soon. So if they like it, their kids will like it. If they don't like it, their kids won't even hear about them. So you need to be able to have lots of kids, lots of young adults playing poorly. So then out of that big funnel, you can then get the hundreds or thousands who want more lessons. And then you can get those who want to be part of tournaments, and then part of maybe a college system, and then part of a university system, and then part of the pros. But if you don't have a big funnel to attract people, it's unlikely that the numbers at the end of the funnel are going to be enough to sustain the interest of society in the game. And so the USTA needs to fund this funnel. Imagine if you run a sales organization and you got to make all these calls. Well, the company has to give you a car, a cell phone, a computer, and a list at least, so you do that. But if you have 42,000 zip codes, well, they got to have money to fund that. And then the better salespeople, I suppose, will stay and build and work on that funnel. But if the USTA focuses on the end of the funnel, the show and preserve what they like, their jobs, who's going to work that funnel? The coaches? The coaches are not going to pay for that. They have their own families to maintain. So the USTA has to pay for that, but they refuse to pay for that. And the sections eat the money. And when I say eat the money that they get in grants, they use it for themselves, not for coaches. And so somebody has to bear that cost. And that cost has to be borne by the USTA because it is the beneficiary of the tax break in the dozens of millions of dollars every year, and because they control the game, and because they want to control the game. So they have a poor system. They don't have a vision. They have the leadership that doesn't understand what is required for the game to grow. And because they don't do any of that, they focus on the show, and they think the show is great. The show matters very little in my opinion.
I know Ivan is taking notes and asked some questions here when we wrap this up. But he mentioned that he loved how you said that we need to have millions and millions of players with horrific backhands. And
that's right.
That's with so the CEO, the current CEO, he should hire you as his advisor tomorrow. Are you going to become the CEO tomorrow? In a perfect world, Rush Limbaugh, just the title of one of his books, "The Way Things Ought to Be." It's just a great title. The way things ought to be. But someone comes in now and they inherit that 100 tennis courts in one zip code and that huge overhead. But like say pickleball, for example, and I think people are pretty much saying straight across the board, pretty soon the USTA will be called the USRA. It'll be United States Racket Association.
Correct. That is correct.
But we lost out on not marketing and selling and missionary zeal, and having old people like myself say, well, you can't really play that well with the yellow ball. But I'm telling tennis players, show up on pickleball courts, take tennis rackets and take foam balls, and you can play mini tennis on a pickleball court. The pickleball people have invaded tennis. But it's like, okay, let's make this work, but let's make this work where you're learning both sports. And I know there are differences, but it's a con that what took place in the 70s overnight when tennis boomed because the tiebreaker put tennis on TV. Everybody and their brother was a tennis teacher. And, I just think there was a sellout too quickly with the PTR in this country and the USPTA, where all of a sudden they're pickleball organizations. But whoever were to take over, they're going to inherit some problems. But I think one thing is, okay, here are the problems. What are the solutions? What is your take on pickleball?
Here's the thing to understand, and it's really important. The USTA rode the wave of the energy and the interest of tennis as it was growing throughout the 70s and 80s, and America got its champion. The proper leadership at the time should have said, this is a wave that we need to nourish. Let's invest so more people play. But they didn't do that. So they just rode the wave like a surfer did, and knew it's going to the end of the wave. And then there needs to be investment at the grassroots level. There is no other choice. Here's a further problem. Given how much America has grown, how much the income level has grown, how the needs of women to go into the labor force has made it more difficult for kids to go out on their own to the park or be taken to the park by the then mother, right? Now the mother works, the father works, there's nobody to take the kids. So the kids won't play, even though there may be a park sort of nearby. Nobody's going to let their kids go. So then what happens is the social component that tennis used to have is gone, but it is alive with pickleball. The exercise component of being able to go to the club or to the park and play is also gone, but it's not gone with pickleball. And then they made tennis so complicated to learn and compete Whereas in pickleball, you show up at any court, you put your racket, you get to play, you meet people, you have fun. So it goes back to the same dynamic. Now, if you want to play pickleball well, it serves you a lot if you know how to hit good tennis strokes. You would actually play quite well. So I think if pickleball is used under the right dynamic, you could get a lot of people ending up wanting to play tennis. But you won't, even though they're at the same court, if you don't change the system that you have, which is expensive, pay to play. It's not fun. It's not social. When kids today have one need that needs to be solved, which is how do you create kids that are more connected to actual kids and not their phones? You got to create the right environment. And the answer to any problem is always education. Coaches need to be re-educated on how to train. Of course, they got to train the right strokes, but the right strokes giving the new dynamic and the new mindset of the kids. Kids today don't read, but they learn in 15-second clips. Kids need to be entertained in a way while taught. So all this dynamic has to change. So rather than spending all this money trying to preserve the status quo, the money should be spent on education for coaches, for parents, for kids, so more people play the sport. The country and the society needs tennis. Tennis can help an enormous amount of families and kids in play. I'm not promoting a champion. Champions will come if they're in the right system at the right time. But you need a massive amount of players exercising, socializing, and learning the benefits of tennis. And if you want to play pickleball well, you better take tennis lessons because that's how you will actually play quite well.
Coming back to I'm sorry, go ahead.
Unfortunately, pickleball is going to be soon played by a lot of the younger tennis players who left tennis. And you could start to see that with J.D. Bouchard, Sam Crary, Jack Sock. You wait until those people start bringing in younger people. Kids that are 17, 18 that would be college players are going to start playing. And wait till the colleges get into the pickleball scene. It'll be the growth of that sport is just going to never end because of its social component. Well, the need that it fills is the social component, and tennis no longer does it.
Well, it fits instant gratification.
Correct.
Tennis is a very difficult sport. Ivan's liking of we need millions and millions of people with horrific backhands. All you have to do is watch people play pickleball for the first time. And they really need to be told, that, hey, prevention of injury, number one, but two, that if you want to play other sports, from paddle tennis, back in the 40s, the perforated wooden mallet, the outfit called spec tennis. I think people should Google that, order spec rackets, and play mini tennis, or even play some version of mini tennis on pickleball courts with a spec racket, because Dave Fish, a longtime associate, it's the great term. It's a bridge sport, because if you play pickleball, you won't learn to play tennis. But if you play tennis, you could play pickleball. But
that's correct.
That if you play with a spec racket and say an orange ball, you could say. I mean, we have kids hit with. We did some film the other day. Had kids hitting with a spec racket because you really have to use your legs so efficiently. With 60 minutes, I've said you need to be your homework, your research, your passion to improve tennis needs to be on 60 Minutes in the USA. Tell us about 60 Minutes Australia.
Well, I wrote that solution, which you read, that solution PDF. I wrote the same one for Australia, and all I really did is cross out for the USTA. I crossed that out and put Australia. And people and the followers that I have in Australia read it and saw it. And pretty soon I got invited to do different podcast interviews, and some parliament members contacted me who had been involved in tennis. don't forget, Tennis Australia has also a participation problem. Their number 1 and 2 players are actually either foreign born or half of a parent is Australian, and they actually recruited them, which means they don't have their own, as they did in the past, right? And this is a society problem. And so these parliament members contacted me, and pretty soon a member of 60 Minutes of Australia contacted me and asked me to analyze the financials and give my view of how Tennis Australia was run. They sent a crew over to my house, and we set up in the course of our complex here. And they interviewed me for 60 minutes, and I made all the different criticisms based on the financials that I saw. And then pretty soon, that story was actually stopped to be aired by 60 Minutes in Australia because the powers that be probably didn't like what I had to say. And I basically have the same thing to say as the USTA here. The sport is supposed to serve the people, and the people, meaning the leaders, are not supposed to serve themselves by the sport and by controlling it. And that dynamic has to change. And until that changes, unfortunately, they ride the wave, but they age the sport. And this is a crime, in my opinion. You cannot age a sport that requires youth.
Tennis
that
Australia.
makes no sense.
Go ahead.
Well, it makes no sense. Tennis is a sport that you need to learn when young, and it's played by young people. And when we watch people play it, they are the young. So if there's one thing you don't do, is you age the sport. You want to make it younger and younger and younger, not the opposite. And we do exactly. The USTA, through its non-playing CEO and chairman, do exactly the opposite of what the sport is.
Oh, there's so many things that come into this: the Alpha generation and Z generation, and
correct.
And, Steve Robertson, he was a guest on our podcast, and he's written a book on, and yet, now he's an expert talking to companies and colleges and teams about how the different generations vary. It's interesting just to go back to the microwave, and before the microwave, the woman didn't really work outside of the home. But technology isn't always for the best. But coming back to Australia, I think they're definitely guilty of buying players like, say, Kakistan. Like the Elena Rybakina.
Yeah, that's it.
Let me hear you say it.
Elena Rybakina.
Yeah, so a little bit better there. Let me hear you say Javier Palenque. Let me hear you say that, Javier.
Javier Palenque.
Yeah. So, but anyway, my question, so Pakistan or Tennis Australia or some of these countries, Max Cressy came and spent some time with us, and I think it's his mother is American, his father is French, and he had the opportunity to pick one federation over the other at one point because he had the potential or has the potential of being. I think he's been ranked as high as 35 in the world, so perhaps he could carry the flag for one of those two countries in the Davis Cup or the Olympics. But what about inspiration? I do think, like, say, the Serena and Venus. Their story, and Matt Clore said that in talking to him today, that there's definitely they inspired a lot of people to play. But the current CEO or the USTA came out and said by the year 2035 they want 35 million people. And some people think that the budget cuts that they're making, Jose Aguirre is opposed to that, or Wayne Bryan said, well, I think they should just drop the whole program. With what are you banking on? I mean, what would you say? Hey, this is how we're going to get more people playing. And I guess the question in the end is, do these champions, how inspiring are them? First, if that's one approach, but how about the local scene and just getting volunteers and parents involved and the grassroots level? And it's a mystery. The game is not that complicated. That's where the people coaching the game, for the most part, they don't have a handle on what Vic Braden did back in the 70s, breaking all these myths with getting aerial. A forehand's a forehand, doesn't know it's being hit by an 8-year-old or 18-year-old, and the grip is the grip. Right. But what do you think about inspiring players by having champions opposed to, I mean, I think you can approach it from both sides, but which one is more powerful, and what are your thoughts on that?
This goes back to not understanding the dynamics of the demographics of the country and the psychographics. The psychographics means how we behave, how we buy, how we reach a conclusion to take an action. Those are the psychographics. In the past, TV was the only medium that was there to entertain. So people were to watch a show, watch Walter Cronkite, watch whatever show that was of interest of yours, because you had not many choices. So that was the default. So then, of course, if you have a young person like the Williams from an underprivileged background with a superb story, then that draws attention because you only have one focal point to do that. Today, kids and society don't have one. They have unlimited. So if they used to have one channel, which was the TV, now they have unlimited. So the notion that some person is going to inspire this level of desire for people to play sounded good when only TV was existent. But now kids have a million things to choose from. So that no longer holds true. What holds true is what parents need. And the USTA, through its chairman and CEO, don't understand what the people need. Parents need their kids to exercise, sweat, and gain competence, and be social. This is how you solve the tennis problem. And so there's got to be a change in the way of thinking so that happens. The same thing happens with this diversity, and that could take many, many different points of view. But, you know, for people of certain ethnic and economic backgrounds, unless they see somebody that looks like them, they don't think it's interesting at all. And I will give you this example, for example. And I mentioned this to a board member. And this would give you a very clear explanation of how the disconnect exists. How many people have watched a polo match in their lives? Not many. How many people care about polo? Not many. So do you know who the champions are of polo? Not really. And that's how most of America feels about tennis. There is no connection. To create the connection, a problem needs to be solved. What's the problem? Parents need their kids to exercise. Parents need their kids involved in a lifetime sport. Parents need their kids to lose weight. Tennis has an enormous potential if it was correctly marketed, channeled, and communicated to the growing masses of people that have a problem that nobody addresses. So looking for a champion sounds good, but I don't think it matters. It used to matter 30 years ago. Today, people still think if there's a new Andy Roddick, it'll be great. No, there won't. I'm sorry to disagree.
No, I love that answer with different times. Back in the 50s when boxing was so big, it was like every Friday night it was on TV and people were watching. But when the tiebreaker came around, James Van Allen, 1970, that could put tennis on TV because before sets could be 22-20, 16-18. So different times. But I think that's a great answer about the parents. But I think parents right now, they don't know it. I always ask parents, I've been in this business a long time, met a lot of parents. Unfortunately, for every tennis kid I've met two parents. And kids are so passive because my father, we grew up in a household with 6 kids, 4 boys, and my father had this line, the house was not a gymnasium. We grew up when the weather up in upstate New York, the weather's lousy, and you have some energy to expend. But now kids just go right to their cell phone, and the parents don't. They should really, well, my kids are so well behaved. Well, no, they're just, when I was a kid, and generally now I'm the oldest person in the room. It's been that way for some time now, but you could only watch cartoons on Saturday morning. And if you were playing sports, you were watching cartoons. I want to circle back and ask about the USTA. We're talking about Tennis Australia, and I think it's Craig Morris, not Greg. Craig Morris.
Yes, Craig Morris.
I've never met him, but the hype, the success, the happy slam, it is outstanding, and everyone loves it. It's the players love it. It's so many positives. But to my understanding, there's 3 divisions. There's community tennis. This isn't like Nona, and I don't think this is the same with the sections. But there's community tennis, player development, and then education, which was called USTAU. And I believe Paul Roeder one time was under the USTAU and Steve Keller, but now I think Paul Roeder is under special projects. But Craig Morris.
Correct.
And you again, it's not sour grapes, but he's being paid $800,000 a year. But now Martin Blackman, who is paid similar, he works underneath him now. But the USTAU, I think that was great. But the idea to have education, I was fortunate to be involved with a program where I could redesign a curriculum, a general recreation curriculum into a comprehensive tennis curriculum. And that was the first. And then there was Ferris State and Methodist. And, now again, young people feel like they can just go to their fingertips and learn how to teach tennis, via YouTube and such. But what about the division of those or the cohesiveness? I mean, those different departments, to me, I think in Lake Nona, they should have a model program where they're teaching, this is how tennis should be taught. This is, come in and watch our early childhood development program. And it should be an education center as well. And there should be a connection. They really shouldn't be separate. I mean, tennis is tennis, but why don't you just talk a little bit about, Morris coming in from Australia and then, what's going on between the division of those 3? So, I mean, you obviously have insiders and, where do you get your information from, but just touch upon that.
Well, the thing is, they all are trying, the USTA is trying to come up with a new star, which is why they fund player development under the hopes that a star will come. That is foolish. Then they have community tennis, but community tennis really is done through the sections, and there's no real understanding of the demographics that are changing the country and the psychographics. And I know I'm repeating this, but it's really important because if kids know how to buy, this is how they will behave. So you got to be able to do what they want. A perfect example is how do they buy a pizza? My kids buy a pizza in 3 seconds, and they get the pizza here. And that's how. So that's the control. That simple exercise means how do the kids have control of their tennis? They don't. And this is why the USTA is so mistaken. They don't give the control of the game to the kids in an age where the kids are empowered to do anything they want through their phone. Anything they want, they do through their phone. But the USTA doesn't do that. They're still in the old model. We're going to create a star, and because we have a star, people are going to go watch the event. No, they won't. They haven't, and it's not going to happen. And then you have the USTA trying to control everything and create a university. The USTA really what it wants to do is make sure PTR and USDPR disappear. So they have the control of everything that happens in tennis. Well, that doesn't work. Monopolies don't work. Competition works. Sharing of information works. This goes back to the bell curve. This is the best example of how I can phrase how an organization should be. If the USTA was a person, what kind of a person would it be? A teenager, an adult, or a grandpa? It would be a grandpa. And the grandpa has already lived his life or her life, right, a grandma, and they have their way of thinking, and nobody's going to change them because they can't change that way of thinking. But the USTA should be really, in a personified way, 35-year-old person with debt, with ambition, with a mortgage, with young kids willing to work 80 hours a week to grow. So you cannot have a culture of a grandfather that's aging the sport and the mindset of a grandfather who's lived his life when what the country needs and what the state of tennis needs is a mindset of a 35-year-old with that ambition and youth to work to accomplish something for the kids. This is the difference. And so the USTA is trying to control tennis when in fact, if we want it to grow, you have to cede control to those who know, to the coaches, and create a system so everybody collaborates in a way. The other day I was coming back home, and I did post that in one of my articles. There were kids playing pickleball. Pickleball has no organization of any kind in the sense that these are the tournaments. Tons of kids waiting to play randomly and enjoy a good time. That means they have control of their game, right? Control of their time. They just go to the court and play and enjoy it and meet people. How wonderful can it be? Now, those who want to be super competitive out of those, great. We've got to create a system for them. So the system that needs to be created is pre-K, K, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, adult life. This path doesn't exist. And Craig Morris thinks that if you give tennis rackets to the schools without education, they're going to play it. No, they're not. There is a disconnect between the times we live in, the leadership that is required, and I can tell you this, tennis has an enormous market to satisfy, which is parents. And it focuses on building a champ and a show in New York. It's exactly the opposite of what it is.
I think one thing that, like say Jose senior moment, Jose Aguirre and Patrick McEnroe, when they were with player development, the idea was, well, they both lived in a big white castle a long ways away from where the action was taking place. And say going back to tennis Memphis, hands on deck. I mean, I think it's very easy to be that bureaucrat, it's a pretty strong word, the parasite who you're not with you're not with the people. You're in the you're in the air conditioned suite, and that's not where tennis happens. With Bell Telephone, when did you first come to the U.S.?
I came here as a young kid with my dad when I was I think 5 or 6 years old.
And then you played college tennis, but when did you actually become a citizen?
In 2000, 24 years ago.
But Bell Telephone, the Iron Fist, that certainly was a monopoly. With say Lake Nona, this spent a lot of time in Germany among many other countries, and in Germany, a tennis facility, say it's privately owned and publicly ran. That if you're a tennis coach, you can just go rent courts. In some ways, what could happen at Lake Nona is instead of saying, well, we have our own UST coaches, is just let pros come in and rent courts, because a lot of times the courts are empty, and there would be some craziness to it for sure. And then the consumer could say, well, okay, this coach is on these 4 courts. I mean, there's 100 courts. You do the math. You could have 25 coaches, 25 programs. You could have a full parking lot, and
that is correct.
And then then the consumer would say, well, I like the way this coach is doing it. I like the way that coach is doing it. You don't want to have a hotel with empty rooms. You don't want to have empty tennis courts. Right. But yeah, breaking monopoly. I've heard another strong word is culture. Is turning a culture around is like turning an ocean liner on a dime.
Let me give you an example. Let me give you a visual example. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's important because you're talking about something that's relevant. If player development has a whole separate section that you can't go in because of who knows why. If you go to a pizza place, you know what's really fun? To watch the cook make the pizza. That's what's really fun. If you go to Fuddruckers, you watch the steak. You watch you watch everything. And what does the USTA do? Oh, we're going to put them in some floor security guard. I'm sorry. It's beyond ridiculous. I should be able to go to Lake Nona and meet the players and talk to them so my kids want to be like them. I want to out. This is how it should be. It's not like they have it. It is all wrong. It is all wrong how they perceive things. They age the sport. They make it away from. It's a pizza place. I want the cook to be shown. That's it.
That's funny. With my days as a tennis bum, I did a number of things at night so I could be around tennis all day long. But then when I went out to work with Vic Braden, initially I was an observer, and I had a job at a pizza pub restaurant. I was a bartender, but I got to the point where I could make a pizza. I could actually throw the dough up in the air, and it's been a long time since I did that. But that was fun. Your business background. Let me run this by you. And again, I believe in the Peter principle. I think so many times people are promoted beyond their level of competency. So I'm a ball hopper guy. I teach tennis teachers. But Russell Crowe, the actor, I think it was 2008 when the economy was down and the American government was trying to save the car industry. The term buyout or whatever it was called, buy-in.
Yep.
And so Russell Crowe said on a talk show, and at that time, I think our population was roughly 330 million people. And Russell Crowe said, why doesn't the government just give every American $1 million? And that'll make the economy grow. So then he added, some people will be buying motorcycles, some people will be buying cocaine, but that would really make the economy go. I've always thought that the American economy, the American car would run 100,000 miles, then it would die. And these foreign cars, the Japanese cars, for example, they were brought in and now they go 200,000 miles. But I just think that, you could say, well, from a business standpoint, this is why the government was right and the government, Russell Crowe was wrong. But I just think that expression is give it to the people. It needs to make business sense. But the USTA is a Peter Burwaj concept. That's where I learned it. And I'm sure he learned it from someone who learned it from someone. It goes back generations because it just makes sense. Is that the corporation, it should be the upside down triangle. It's just so top heavy, and where is the money going? So does Russell Crowe have a good business plan or not? What do you think?
Well, again, we live in America, the land of the free and the land of the brave. So what we need is, we don't need monopolies. We need the independent people to come up with their solutions. And in fact, when the USTA was the least organized, they made the least amount of money. We had the most players and the most records of any country in the world. And that is the answer. It's called freedom. And they try to suppress it by controlling it. It is exactly the opposite of what it is.
I think there's some history that in '87, that's when the USTA started with player development. But then the Berlin Wall coming down and, tennis exploding, the Soviet puppet nations, tennis was not an Olympic sport, so it was suppressed. So there's always that comment. You hear, well, we don't have many players in America because all the athletes play football, basketball, baseball. I just think, my Spanish, Caca de Toros, is the bull, that there's plenty of talent, but it's just
right.
Education. And I think it's 100% right. You can't just that's what I was telling people with Tennis Memphis. You just can't get a racket in a poor kid's hand and, someone who's underserved, underprivileged, and, think, oh, this is going to work. You have to, and I think the idea of having activity, just come out and play. I think the idea of the transition balls, like Wayne Bryan said, those are great training tools. Just have people come out and play. And that's where, pickleball, I remember with, his name escapes me just for a moment, but a leader with the USPTA, somebody I've worked with a long time ago, senior moment, that pickleball, needs to be, it should remain a casual sport. In other words, it's a pickup sport. You can just show up at the park and play.
That's correct.
We should take lessons from pickleball where, tennis is so clicky, and and then if people evaluate the tennis teachers so many times, they're really just catering to, say, 20 wealthy people. They don't have that many students, so that it's not really growing the game. But to have people come out and But I think we should find a way to circle back with pickleball. And it's like, okay, we need to have people learn both tennis and pickleball together. And we need to the social side of it. How pickleball is so easy. It's a major problem.
Tennis can grow. Tennis has to find the right customers, but the current leadership has to listen to discerning points of view. Friction is good. This is how all businesses work. But if they have a monopoly of the control of the game and they control the income, all they're doing is aging the game. And once it ages, there's not enough money to unage it. There's just not enough money.
With the beginning of the conversation, and I don't think it necessarily needs to be totally dropped, but player development. What should happen with player development? I think you've already said it. But
I think player development needs to exist and it needs to be funded, but it needs to be funded in a way that the money reaches the kids so they can travel and fight and compete. I'll give you a story about a player called Coria from Argentina.
Oh, yeah. Fast.
He had no money. He trained in Key Biscayne. He slept on the floor. Whenever there was a trip somewhere, he would sneak on the bus. He didn't have money to pay for the hotel. His friends let him in, and he slept on the floor, and he was the best of them all. Here's the point. The point is, you have to have that hunger, and you have to have money for player development. But the money has to be used in a way that it allows the majority of the kids to have an opportunity, not create kingmakers by the bureaucrats who choose who gets the money, who doesn't. They play that game. They develop nobody. So it doesn't make any sense. So I am against player development as it currently is. I am for using that money or more money if it helps more people. Not that money is used on a few coaches, on a few people. No.
I think with Andy Roddick's podcast too is that there's too much, let's pat ourselves on the back. I think the ratio in America, you should have, 3 kicks in the fanny and 1 pat on the back. We were, in all ways we're reversing that, but I think there's too much claiming too. I've met so many people in tennis and everybody's been connected. Say years ago, everybody would say, yeah, I work for Mr. Hopman. Yeah, I work for Mr. Hopman. And the same thing is, yeah, I worked with Serena. I worked with Venus. But I do think the USTA was saying, well, how much did they really do? How much did they really have to do with case by case study? So I don't think that it's really, with insiders, it doesn't sit too well when they say, well, we have all these players in the top 100 now. Because then if you evaluate their stories, it's just like with Tennis Canada, who's our neighbor, is just hungry immigrants that have found a way to hit a lot of tennis balls.
And Roddick said in his podcast, he said the USTA was happy to provide money, provided he dumped his coach. How could he possibly do that if that's the coach who took him to that point? And that's the whole thing. That's the whole mentality. And that needs to change. And the only way that will change is at the boardroom, you welcome people who don't think like you. That's how you do it. You don't sing Kumbaya, but they just want people who sing Kumbaya. So take, we need to see how the pizza is made. We need to see the cook. We don't sing Kumbaya and we help people. It doesn't get any simpler than this.
No, I remember you sat with me round by round for one Orange Bowl, and the player I was with, he won the Orange Bowl. And, then he was told that everything I taught him was wrong. One thing that we do is a little bit different. Is we document everything as far as where they were when they started and their level of play. Let's do this. Let's have Ivan. We'll ask some questions, and then we throw it back to you, or you can wrap this up. But go ahead, Ivan. What questions do you have?
Yeah, I've been taking notes, listening. I got a train of thought going here, arrows. So if you'll listen along, interject at any time to make a comment, or if I say something incorrectly. I want to start with something that Steve mentioned that was true. Is what I did some the research for this podcast. Listen to the previous podcast we had, and the YouTube video that you had shared with us on the USTA. And for starters, it seems like people should be listening to you more, because you provide the problems, which most people can do, but then you also provide the solutions, which is rare, and you just lay it out. And I'm shocked that I'm not shocked, and I'm shocked in the same sense that not much effort is going into really studying what you've put together, and making attempts to make tennis a better sport in America. One thing I wanted to say was that Steve had mentioned a comment you made that, and it's 100% true. You want to player and engagement of tennis in the U.S. has to increase, and having the crappy forehands and the crappy backhands is correct, and the more players the better. But I can only draw from personal experience. I'm younger, so I can only say from what I've seen and heard and experienced. I have a brother. He and my sister-in-law, his wife, they love to play tennis, but it's when I visit them, because I can actually keep the ball and play for them, and they are getting the exercise that they would like to get. So it's crappy backhands and crappy forehands. Yes, that's great on one sense, but if they can't rally the ball back and forth more than 5 times, they're not going to get the exercise that they would get, as opposed to let's say pickleball or even ping pong, easier sport. And I'll get back to that in terms of the downward trend that we have with society in the U.S. and the affluenza. We mentioned that word affluenza. It's like the more you have, the less you have. And you can say the other way around: the less you have, the more you have. And the people become too intoxicated with comfort. So tennis though is an associate. It's a tough sport. Like I just mentioned, it's tough to rally back and forth. More than 5 balls for an absolute beginner. You hand them a racket, it's okay, here, rally, and you're hard pressed to find anybody that can just flat out just rally right away. So it's a tough sport, and the toughness of that sport isn't associated, isn't realized until they get on the court and they realize, oh, okay, this is actually difficult. And then as a result, they will have, next time they have a choice of whether they want to exercise and socialize, back to your case, Javier, socializing, tennis won't be their first option, because they can't socialize because they're getting frustrated. They can't hit the ball back and forth. Again, this is from personal experience with having family members that want to participate in tennis and want to try and see it as a sport that they can engage in consistently. So education in that sense needs to be also prevalent when thinking of solutions to all these problems, where we also need to give players and newcomers to the sport a way to more easily say, okay, here are the grips, here's the racket, this is what the court is, here's how you rally, here's how you have your social, this is how you rally back and forth. And that's what our efforts are, mainly with the GreatBase and such. Following with my train of thought is, you mentioned early on in the podcast, what does tennis mean? What does tennis really mean to people? And you had mentioned leadership skills for life. In other sports, you watch hockey, the playoffs are on now, go Leafs go. But the playoffs with hockey, that hockey's a tough sport. They hit each other against the wall. You watch football, I mean, they're lining up to hit each other. You think of those sports and you think of toughness, you think of resilience. You have all these associated qualities with these sports that are not associated with in tennis. You feel like with players, or especially kids that play these sports, they come out of the sport having true life skills. So, and unfortunately, tennis does not have that. And I can attribute to that because I played high school tennis in California. In high school tennis, it's on the decline. It's a non-contact sport. It's considered a soft sport. There are no fans. Nobody comes to watch tennis. It's not a high stakes sport. Why? Because now there's a no cut policy. It's a less prestigious sport to play. If you get on the baseball team or the football team or the basketball team and you're made varsity, it's something to talk about. It's something that's prestigious. It's something that's not everyone gets to do. It's like, oh, you play on the basketball team, you play varsity, or you play. So it's something that engages people. Where tennis is not that at all. I remember first coming into my high school, and I was talking with my friends that had no association with tennis whatsoever, and I heard comments like, "Oh, it's a girly sport, isn't it?" And I had to, try and straighten them out. It's like, no, it's actually a really fun sport. But that's the dilemma, the dogma behind what the tennis sport is. So it's not associated with being the tough sport that it actually is, and because it's non-contact, because of the no-cut policies and everything getting softer in that sense, which I want to get to, it's just getting worse and worse. With the internet, the phone. In a previous podcast, we had Ilya here sitting where I'm sitting. He talked about how the phone is just, you can name it a cancer, a disease, a virus. It is destroying everything in society, really. People are in the house now more than outside, so they're not looking to have. You mentioned how we want kids to have more exercise, lose weight, and the phone's a huge problem with that. People are inside, they're playing games, they're on the phone, they're looking at their tablets. They're not outside playing sports and looking to have interactions with people. So, all this, like this storm of just the attention span again on the phone is horrible. With because of the attention span shortening over the years, we have things in sports such as I can go to tennis, the UTS, the Ultimate Tennis Showdown. It's an attempt to grab the audience of mainly the younger audience. So look at this fast way to play sports, and it's great that they've been able to capture pros, elite pros, and play this game. And so that's great on one sense. Also, other sports such as hockey, for example, I noticed that the overtime is now 3-on-3, or it's shortened format, and that could be attributed to the same thing, where less attention span. You're starting to grab users' attention and try and hold them to the TV, because no one's on the TV anymore. Kids, like you said, the majority of the population are the youth who should be targeted to grow the game, because that's the majority of the population, and they're not watching the stuff that is being funded to produce. Like you mentioned, it comes full circle. If the USTA is relying on the US Open and no one's actually watching the US Open, the numbers don't really matter, because the core majority of the population in the US that is going to grow the sport is dissociated from that. So again, it's coming from full circle. Another thing, just notes I'm going over here, Tennis TV and the ATP on YouTube do a great job. They interview the pros. They put little clips out there. They put highlights, and so they're making attempts to grab the younger audience, because they're on the Instagram, they're on the YouTube, just watching nothing but everything but the TV. It'd be very difficult for you to find a group of tennis players, not just tennis players, anybody watching a match on TV. And really,
even tennis players don't watch tennis.
Even tennis players don't. You're absolutely correct. We have players here stay at our tennis house here up in Wintergreen, and tennis is on, and they don't watch it. We have to sit them down and say, hey, watch this point. Look at this flaw that they have. Like, what do you think about that? Like, and again, that can all come back to the phone. And younger audiences have phones now. When they go to the movies, their attention span is even long enough to watch this movie that a director dedicated their life, like this 2 years of their life to produce. They're on their phone, like texting someone while they're in the movie. So it's absolutely, it's just horrible. So another note associated with that is pickleball plays right into that. Pickleball plays into this, into the decline, in my opinion. I feel strongly about this because decline of U.S. society and the softness that comes with it, where pickleball is an easy sport. You can pick it up, like we just mentioned, and it's easy exercise, easy fun. Just pick up and play, and that plays exactly into the idea of what we just talked about, the short attention span. The people need exercise, but they want to learn tennis, so they're going to do pickleball. Even ping pong's harder than pickleball, so pickleball is just like this easy segue. And like you said, and which I'll mention before, I'll mention it now. Steve had mentioned a minor and private sport, tennis is in the U.S. We would like for it to be a major and public sport. It being public means there are public courts around. The public courts are getting taken over by pickleball. So if you see a public court around, especially in California, pickleball players just find a tennis court and they just think that's their playground. So they get pickleballs, they grab their rackets, and it's perfect for them. Okay, here we go. And they just start playing pickleball on tennis courts. And then, so, I mean, it's just a massive storm of all these things that's just on a decline.
However, I will interrupt you because you're right. Everything you're saying is correct. But this is why being the sport of the 1% is achievable, is something that should be a goal, and is something that tennis can grow if we just all focus on achieving that. And it is possible because there's a 1% of all those people who actually want and will understand the strengths, the values, and what you get out of the sport. So they want their kids to play it.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. The 1%. No, the people that do engage with it, we need to give them opportunities to continue to engage with it and have them, like you said, not just focus on one zip code, but many zip codes. So the kids that do, that 1% that do, let's say in the middle of a state that's not well known for tennis, for example, I'm not going to name states, but a kid that would in theory enjoy tennis, and like you said, the champions will come. That might become a champion. This kid that I'm talking about, that if they don't have the opportunity of living next to a Lake Nona with 100 different courts, they would never have become that champion that we're talking about. They would never have the opportunity to be associated with tennis. And so, I mean,
that's right.
Everything that you say is correct. And circling back to what I first said is, I don't know why USTA isn't taking aggressive steps towards, at least trying some of the solutions you provide. Again, the solutions are important. Everybody can talk about problems, but the solutions are there, which you've done a great job, and what we'd like to thank you for. One other thing.
Let me answer the question. Let me answer the question why they don't want me there. Because the first thing I would say is, I don't need you people. You're the problem. Get out. I want new people here. And that's why they would never invite me.
That's how pro sports works. I have a brother who's general manager, 2 teams, associate GM in the NHL. GM gets fired, everybody goes. Say in big time football, they get a new head coach. A new head coach brings in their staff. So, there's in a lot of ways it's okay. Let's start over, but it's at the management levels, administrative, everything. It's a big corporation with a lot of people. A lot of people, I think, on my side of it, really good people, really good causes, good intent, passion, but they're not trained to teach tennis.
But let me. Sorry to interrupt you again, but I think this is important. The fact that the CEO does not play tennis actually is an excellent opportunity to change things. But what does he rely on? The people who have played, and therefore, rather than use his lack of knowledge to bring in new thinking, he relies on the old thinking that have created the problems, and therefore all he has achieved is multiply the problem.
Well, I think
you understand?
Yeah, I think it is a bonus to play for sure. Vic Braden, if you expect your students to play, you should play. Go through that learning curve.
Course.
But it's too easy to be an expert. All you have to do is listen to commentators on TV. I always tell people, I'm going to put it on an expensive ad in the tennis magazines. The tennis magazine from years ago was like a small telephone book. And I'm going to say, tennis course for TV commentators. No one's gonna show up, but there is the need for that because, again, education is information transfer, and I mean that's where just core knowledge. We start with the court, the grips,
That's right.
shape of the swings, just core knowledge. That exists in other sports. Is that, and a lot of it's, again, like when a kid picks up a football, they're not going to throw it too well with a palm up motion. You can tell in 2 seconds if someone can swim or not, but anything goes in tennis. A kid can play for 5 years easily. They have a palm up serve, totally, pizza position, patty cake motion. They play 5 years of tournament tennis and they've never gone to the net one time. I mean, it's really, unless someone hits a let court or drop shot, miss hit. But go ahead, Ivan.
Yeah, I just had one more comment from when I did do I did my due diligence and watched the previous podcast and such. You mentioned how the tournament schedule is also killing the sport, where it needs to be play to play. It's pay to play now, and that awards people who have money and not skill, for example. And that reminded me of a situation we had down in Florida at the Battle of Boca, a local tournament that's held every weekend. And at the Battle of Boca, the prices, it's a UTR tournament, the prices, it seems like they keep going up every month, and people keep playing, people keep paying. And it's a great service. Again, it's great that there's the courts there. It's great that the tournament happens. But in regards to the pricing, Steve had mentioned, and Steve, you can chime in off this after, where the players should just the players' parents should just boycott the tournament to lower the prices. And then a day later, Steve came back and said, no, that idea won't work because the wealthy parents will just pay the fee no matter what it is, and they'll see it as an opportunity for their player to win or get further in the tournament. So that's just what it reminded me of.
Yeah, I remember saying, I'm just sorry to interrupt, but it just said, yeah, the parents should boycott. And, I said that, and then at the end of the tournament, said, actually what would happen is some parents would really like that, because in the competition, the level would be lower, and those trophy hunters, they would love the fact, okay, this is great that there's less competition, but the American way, McDonald's goes on one corner and Burger King goes on the next. But we have to find ways to make tennis less expensive, more accessible, get more people playing. But why don't we throw it over to you, Javier, and then you wrap it up.
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you for allowing me the opportunity to voice my strong opinions. Some people like it, some people dislike it. I'm not against the USTA. I am for the sport.
Let me interrupt. I apologize, but it's very gracious of you, your strong opinions, but in the end, you have some very strong facts. But go ahead.
Right, because I am not against anybody. I am for the sport. And I believe that the sport needs to help more people, because I believe that if we help more people play the sport, we leave the country better off than we received it. And I think it should be our objective and goal to leave the country and the sport better off than when we used it or found it or actually were participants of it. And so, unfortunately, the USTA, if anybody from the USTA listens to this, they're aging the sport, and they are the wrong leadership at the wrong time. And in order to change that, there has to be friction, and there has to be an open-mindedness to listen to people who disagree with you. In fact, I am one who just has strong opinions and can write them, but there's a lot of people who have better ideas than I do, that they send me their ideas and I, put them together. And the fact is, tennis has a place in America. Parents need tennis. Kids need tennis. The country needs tennis. And there's one solution to most of the problems in the world, and that's education. And if we don't address that, understanding that the demographics have shifted, the psychographics have shifted, and the technology changes everything, doing what was done in the past is foolish. And what the USTA does is do what was done in the past, expecting different results. So I hope that those who have listened to this podcast got a little insight into what those solutions are. I think tennis should be the sport of the 1%. I think boys and girls should play, and I think their parents need to play. And I think the way tennis is taught, meaning it has to be first entertainment, then physical, then the technical aspects, so you can get them hooked. And I think if we just aim for the 1%, we would be the envy of the world. And if you just look at the background of most of the people that played, most of them escaped poverty through the sport. And that is the driver. And so here we can't make it the sport that, in fact, what the driver is, which is hunger, we actually suppress. That makes no sense. That's all I have to say.
No, that's great. I think with the parents, I love how you talked about that, the parents and exercise and health, put that first and foremost and get people in the game. I love what you both said about public courts and getting people on the court. But it's also too is give and get. You know, we have a strong push on peer teaching. You know, with the people I was mentored by as a young age. You know, people. That's one thing about the content that we show online is we show little kids hitting the ball well. Now that doesn't mean they're going to end up being champions. You know, most champions, it's the intangibles. There's so many reasons. Like this girl from China who's so good. What an athlete, Shang.
Yeah.
You know, she has has a lot of problems. You think of Irani from Italy, both have a lot of problems on their serve. So, you know, a lot of people, they don't do a deep dive and they, you know, we have our critics. Well, they, you know, hate's a strong word. You know, we just have nothing to do with the GreatBase and we just make people hit off a cone. And, but yeah, so that ability just to play, you know, I do think people get lessoned out, programmed out. I liked it better in America years ago where, you know, we teaching pros just gave private lessons. You just gave out 1 hour private lesson. And then it was up to the kid to find a backboard, feed balls to each other, go out and play mini tennis for Mountain Dews or whatever. And yeah, there are just so many things that need to be done. But I do think that your background as a consultant, your background from a business standpoint, that expression, you know, where does the money go? Just follow the money and you get all sorts of answers. And obviously you've done that with your homework. But no, your passion is greatly appreciated. And I thank you for being a guest again. And I think that we're told this often about what we're trying to do with tennis teaching is just keep up the good fight. And I think it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be a fight, but you're on the side of it right now where it is. You're swimming upstream. If, you know, they're not returning phone calls. And you know, I remember when you applied a couple different times, Florida Tennis. You know, I got on the phone and talked to people. It just, you know, you should be in the room. I mean, actually, that's the current CEO. You know, you don't want to have an advisor who's just a yes person. You know, I do think there's way too much of that within the USTA. You're great. I'm great. We're all great. Aren't we doing great? And
Kumbaya.
Kumbaya. But Javier, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ivan, for the opportunity. And I will say that this to close. If we can't be bothered to stand up for what we believe, then that means we cannot be in a leadership position. The country deserves better. Our sport is the greatest, and more people need to know the joy of playing tennis. And if you get some skill, I'm still trying to improve my backhand. I'm 55 years old, and I still want a lesson that somebody can teach me how to hit a backhand without fear. So,
all right.
Before we sign off here, I like to do this thing where I have a few highlights from the podcast, if you don't mind me reading through them. I have a few of them here.
Sure.
Poor countries are poor because they are poorly managed. The two monks story that you had, I found that to be quite amazing, really well thought out. You're very highly intelligent, Javier. Thanks for sharing that. That's grateful to be speaking to you. Leadership must remain consistent to retain a long-term vision. Barbarians to bureaucrats. Blue-collar sport played by white-collar people. The Djokovic story where he saw his parents had a knife at their throat by a loan shark wanting his payment back, winning for something bigger than yourself. The Ronaldo story you shared where his mom couldn't pay for the electricity bill. The less you have, the more you have. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Great.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, Javier, pearls of wisdom, nuggets for the treasure chest. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Adios, amigo.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Podcast 193 in the books. Andy Fitzell, I've already mentioned this, the founder of our podcast, sent me a text. What would you do if you had $23 million to improve? That's just, but that's not, if it's $550 million, whatever they generate as a net from the US Open, it's not chump change, but it's not the whole enchilada. With, I think, talking to Matt Clory, a lot of notes what I wrote down from him, and there's all sorts of factors. When you start talking about the telephone and instant gratification came up. It's not a matter of just pointing fingers at the USTA, but I do think that we just have to look at other sports. When Patrick Mackin was the general manager, I mean, would the general manager of a pro franchise live 1,500 miles away? Would the head coach, Jose Garris, live 3,000 miles away? But I think also too, it's this funny money that it's Wayne Bryan. I don't agree with the cherry picking. I go back from 87, within 2 years of that, had players that I worked with. I could make a long list of players that we took them from A to B, and then it's like, okay, well, we'll take over from here. I understand college tennis is about recruiting. Even that, I don't think there's enough connection between the college coach and the developmental coach from the junior years. I do think this for U.S. kids, if U.S. kids are listening to this, is they have to realize, and we don't take away from anything, but perspective is, I think this is a phrase that's gone away, is that you're a big fish in a small pond. We have to get more people playing. And, I always, tell young kids that are doing well in the US of A is that, just multiply by 195. I'm ranked 5 in the country, but that's in a 2-year age group. There's some countries that rank everybody, so there's 25,000 players that are tournament players. There's a ranking for that. With Billie Jean King, what she said one time, I heard her say this, is that, so we're the subordinates, we're on the outside. We're outsiders, not insiders, but the coordinates, the people that are leading USTA player development, and I do think there was certainly some positive strides made by Martin Blackman to work with the private sector, but it just doesn't work. I mean, you're a big country with, from coast to coast, 3,000 miles, that, you bring in, you fly in 30 kids, 15 boys, 15 girls from one of the specific age groups, and they're recognized, they're doing well at the sectional level, and they're flown in. That's a lot of money. They're flown in, and then the national coaches are going to step in and say, okay, we need to work on the continental family. We need to work on the slice backhand, and then it's, and again, I've just think where, the money is Javier said, the money it shouldn't be totally dropped, but it just needs to be spent differently. I would say that as a person who's almost 70 years old, I'm definitely a shadow of myself. We talked about the grandpas, though, that, some of our pillars, I have to go through, but I think at least half of them are passed away. But I do think when people hear that, they'll misinterpret his comment. is then they start saying old school. And, some young macho male ego, some guy's 27 years old, he's taught tennis for 3 or 4 years. And, he's going to watch what we do and just say it's old school. And I think another thing that came up is we need to talk more about this is competitive tennis and recreational tennis. It's packaged differently, but it's one and the same. A forehand's a forehand, and we got to break the clicks. I think what you brought up high school, that's a very important point where in other sports, when you make the varsity, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
If someone tells me they played top 5, male or female, they played top 5 in their high school basketball team, that's an athlete. Mm-hmm. Even if it's a really small high school in a state that's not that populated. But yeah, the recognition, with it's like, hey, this is a respected sport. Came up again and again, education. Repeat that again. It's too easy to be an expert. Just because you play the game doesn't mean you can teach the game. I never heard that about Novak. I remember hearing that there's many times where, they're having a meal and there wasn't any protein for the parents. They could only afford protein for the children. I've met so many people from all over the world. What a luxury. I had one mom who grew up in Romania, and we're talking to her kid who, that's the USA, the land of abundance. Her son wasn't being hungry. And, and she said, well, both my parents were teachers. We always had food. And basically, if you read into that, I just asked more questions. So many of her friends didn't have food on the table. It's such a mixed message. Like, say, for example, a kid can afford private lesson after private lesson, and this is what it costs. One thing with the UTR is the UTR, their fees are high, but they're giving money back. What percentage, and that's something also can be discussed. But the USTA, their entry fees are not as high. They've gone up, but they're not money back. And I think one thing that the French system came up, briefly, we talked about the French Tennis Federation. Insiders know they have the best system for competition. And, he said, I think they have the most players. They do. It's very easy to repeat this over and over again, that we in the U.S., we have five times as many people as the French, but they have 5 times as many players. And, we need to go back where everybody plays everybody. And Wayne Bryan, all these 12-year-olds are flying all over the country, you need to be able to, Wayne Bryan, if you can walk around your block and there's somebody who could beat you, try to play them. You get on your bicycle, you ride around the car. Kids are flying all over the country, and they're not making any phone calls to play local matches. I think the system is basically get your checkbook out. So we need to come together. And I think really it's not a matter of, I said that in this last session, we'll go forward, but conclude on this player development is, what does each individual do? What do you do? What do you do to make tennis better? When he says 1%, 330 million people. So we're just looking at trying to get 33 million people playing. So it's love, hate. I think that people listen to Javier, you could see where people would love what he has to say, but there's going to be people who hate what he has to say. So I mentioned that that's where with us with the GreatBase is that, because he's saying some things that are critical, he's going to be disliked right away, but like listen, hear the guy out. He's passionate. He's for the game. He's doing a service for tennis. I think one of the last things, and I think people if we try to reach tennis, the USPTA, the PTR, the whole alphabet soup, is to really try to get parents connected. This is a sport of a lifetime. And I know many parents have said to their child, okay, we're going to pick one sport, and then you pick one sport. Or for example, you have to swim. It's a life-saving skill. You have to take swim lessons. And some kids that grow up and they don't have the opportunity to just take swimming lessons, and that's a crisis. With But a lot of times kids are going to choose a sport where they have the most fun. And that's where we have to work together. And, initially, like in tennis, it's really sad, 5, 6, 7-year-old, that they're being recruited to play tennis all day, every day. And it's so much a fact that if they play multiple sports. So that's where in tennis, okay, well, for early childhood development, we're going to have a camp, but we're going to do cross training. We're going to have kids playing basketball and soccer. Even if you don't have basketball hoops, get a basketball out. Can you do this right-handed? Can you do this left-handed? And, but if someone rocks up to Lake Nona, that's America's home. That's the national campus. That's all the money that's been spent. Someone rocks up. I mean, it should be red carpet. You walk in and go, this is how, this is an educational center. This is how young kids are taught. You have a child who's 5, 6, 7 years old. You just need to go to these courts and, and it should just be part of the program. And you'll be greeted and we'll show you how to do that. And this is not picking on the USTA national campus, but you go all over America and basically it's an activity. John Wooden. Don't mistake activity for learning. Again, I just think like being in Russia and, the way it's a sport, we're going to teach you how to run. We're going to, and okay, we're going to create so many different things from a dynamic standpoint on a tennis court where, you're doing these fun drills that are athletic and relay races and, toss and catch. And I mean, even starting to play with tag, but every kid can be taught a ready position. Every kid can be taught a unit turn. Every kid can be taught these are basic fundamentals. Then you start looking at other sports. Okay, how's somebody stand at the foul line? What are they going to do? The football kid is in a 3-point stance. How do you come out of the starting blocks over and over and over again? But in tennis, anything goes. 2 + 2 = 5. And he said so many great things, but Chuck Creasy, who's been a guest on our podcast, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think the end is player development. Player, okay, that's an individual. They're going to play. They're going to have fun. They would define that word. And then development, there has to be development. And, Javier's such a smart guy. I mean, okay, kindergarten, building blocks. Okay, can we count? Can we add? People make fun of us because we're, so much tennis math. Tell that story about Patrick Mortigola. I was at his place and, he wanted to keep it a secret, but I was teaching a player that he was funding. And he said to me, he goes, you're about tennis math. Tennis is art. And, what it really comes down to, it's a combination of both. That's like saying, it's just art, but it's an art and a science. And the science, okay, that's the math. Is the kid going to have the shape of the swing? It matches the shape of the court. And then you're going to be criticized for teaching fundamentals. And, that's where in the US of A, what a lot of people really, they come here from overseas, they fall in love with the States. A lot of college players love to stay here because it's individualistic. And what happens is the individual becomes bigger than the program. But in American tennis, what we need to do is we need to have a program. That's why we have these podcasts. Can we agree that the tennis court's a rectangle? Can we agree that water runs downhill, not uphill? And going back, Scott Schultz, who's no longer with the USTA, I was invited, people have heard this on this podcast. Well, we're going to put a committee together. And, there's a line where the good Lord took 7 days to create planet Earth. And then he turned it over to a committee. Look what happened. But with, there's even a better one about the rhino. Can you say that? Rhinoceros.
Rhinoceros?
Rhinoceros. Hippopotamuses. But it was supposed to be a horse, but they turned it over to a committee. And look what happened. So with, but yeah, that expression, get everybody on the same page, get everybody in the same book and say, then, you'll hear like say, and again, Andy Roddick, I love his podcast. He goes on and on, but comes back, well, I don't do grips. I'm from Nebraska. I don't do grips. Well, he has a lot to the confidant, the mentor. I don't think that, Brad Gilbert sending Coco Gauff to work with Andy Roddick for 2 days on the serve. In some ways he's humble about it, but the stories out there is it's not about talking about Coco Gauff. We're learning from her and her family, how hard she worked. And I remember watching her play because I was at a lot of tournaments when she was 10, because I was coaching somebody who was in the same, on the boys' side, same semifinals, finals. But so Javier's on a different side of it, but I think he's made a complete study of governing body of tennis. But with player development, last comment, early child development and player development. I'm Joe. I'm a high performance coach. Hi, I'm Steve, a low performance coach. Tennis is tennis. We need to get united, and we don't need to be confused by the 4 majors, the festivals, he calls it, the carnivals. And it's great what's happening at the majors. French Open is coming up. But what's happening in our backyards? Anyway, I hope we touched base. I hope we shared some information, some insights. But Javier, thank you. Ivan, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Javier.
Over and out.
Adios, amigos.
Yes.